Back in February 2026, the world watched as a conflict that had been simmering for decades between the United States, Israel, and Iran finally boiled over into open military attacks. But, a moment like this never just happens out of the blue. To really get what's going on, you have to go back, way back, and unravel this incredibly complex 70-year history of alliances, betrayals, and just deep, deep mistrust.
And it all started with this stunning announcement. On February 28, 2026, President Donald Trump went public, confirming that a major military campaign against Iran was underway. This was a move that basically threw the entire Middle East into uncharted territory and brought all that tension to a sudden, violent breaking point.
So, to make sense of how we got here, here's what we're gonna do. First, we'll break down exactly what happened in February 2026. Then, we'll trace the long history of this conflict, from its roots in decades of distrust, through the whole nuclear standoff, and right up the recent path to confrontation. And finally, we'll look at how the world reacted and what this very unstable future might hold.
Okay, so what were the first shots in this new conflict? Well, it all went down really fast. We're talking about a coordinated series of events that just unfolded over a matter of hours.
It all kicked off with an Israeli preemptive strike on key military sites across Iran. Almost immediately, the United States jumped in, hitting the country's missile and naval capabilities. Iran's response was swift. They launched missiles at both Israel and American bases all across the Gulf. But then came the biggest news of all, confirmed by Iran's own state media. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in the attacks. And just like that, you had a massive power vacuum right at the very heart of the regime.
So this brings us to the crucial question, right? How did we even get here? This conflict isn't just about something that happened yesterday. No, the seeds for this were planted over 70 years ago, and it all revolves around one thing: oil.
You see, the defining break goes all the way back to 1953. Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh decided to nationalize the country's oil industry, which had been controlled by the British. Well, the CIA and MI6 didn't like that, so they helped orchestrate a coup to overthrow it. That single event created this deep, lasting wound over foreign meddling. In fact, you can draw a direct line from that to 1960, when Iran co-founded OPEC as a way for oil-producing nations to take back control. But the real game-changer was the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which got rid of the US-backed Shah and installed an anti-Western government. And almost immediately after that, the Iran hostage crisis began. 52 Americans held for 444 days. That event didn't just damage relations, it completely shattered them and led to the first round of major US sanctions.
Now fast forward to the modern era, and one issue has pretty much dominated the entire US-Iran relationship: Iran's nuclear program. This led to years of really tense negotiations, and eventually a landmark deal that just completely fell apart.
In 2015, all this diplomacy led to what was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA for short. The core bargain was pretty simple. Iran agreed to seriously restrict its nuclear activities and let international inspectors have wide-ranging access. The whole point was to increase its breakout time, that's the time it would take to make enough material for one bomb, from just a few weeks to at least a full year. And in return for all that, the crippling international sanctions were lifted.
And for a couple of years, it seemed to be working. But in 2018, everything changed. President Trump pulled the United States out of the deal. He argued it was too weak, that it didn't do anything about Iran's missile program or its actions in the region. So he launched a campaign of maximum pressure, bringing back incredibly harsh sanctions that crippled Iran's oil and banking industries. That one decision basically tore up the agreement and put both countries right back on a collision course.
So with the nuclear deal dead, that period between 2019 and 2025 became this really dangerous cycle of tit for tat, pushing the region closer and closer to the brink of war. You can see the escalation happen step by step. First, the US did something unprecedented. It labeled a part of another country's military, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist group. Then, in 2020, came the drone strike that killed its most powerful commander, Qasem Soleimani. Iran's response was to ramp up its uranium enrichment, blowing way past the old deal's limits and shrinking that nuclear breakout time all over again. Talks to save the deal were tried, but they failed over and over. And the final step before all-out war came in June 2025, when the US launched its first ever direct military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities.
So, as you can imagine, when news of the February 2006 attacks broke, the international community basically went into crisis mode. And those deep divisions were on full display at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council.
The lines were drawn in the sand very clearly. The UN Secretary General came out and said the airstrikes violated international law. The US and Israel, on the other hand, defended their actions as not only lawful, but necessary to stop a nuclear Iran. Iran's ambassador shot back, calling the attacks a war crime. Russia sided with Iran, demanding a stop to what it called aggressive actions, while the big European countries, the UK, France, and Germany, were kind of caught in the middle, condemning Iran's retaliation, but still trying to push for diplomacy.
Now here's something that's absolutely crucial to understand. While Iran was facing this massive external military attack, the regime was also dealing with a severe crisis right at home. This internal instability is a huge piece of the puzzle, because it meant the government was incredibly weak at a moment of extreme pressure. See, in the months right before the conflict, massive protests had exploded all across Iran, mainly because the currency had completely collapsed. The government's response was a brutal crackdown that led to thousands of deaths and arrests. All this turmoil meant the regime was in a uniquely fragile position when those bombs started falling.
So, if we pull all of these different threads together, what are the most important things to keep in mind as we look at this incredibly unstable situation? It really boils down to a picture of three interconnected crises. First, you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. This isn't just a military force, it's a huge economic and political power in Iran, and it's at the very center of this fight. Second, the regime's grip on power was already being seriously challenged by those huge domestic protests. And third, the death of Ayatollah Khamenei created a leadership vacuum at the worst possible time, leaving Iran's future completely up in the air.
And that leaves us with the million-dollar question. Iran is now without its supreme leader of over 30 years. The entire region is on a knife's edge, and major world powers are in direct conflict. So the whole world is watching and waiting to see what happens next. Is there any path to de-escalation, or are we looking at the start of a much wider, much more devastating regional war?
Don't forget to subscribe to our Global Conflict Brief YouTube channel to stay up to date with the latest events and developments.